welcome. My name is Nuno Bicho. I'm here today, or now, at the moment, in the role of Vice Rector of the University of Algarve. And I just want to welcome you to the SAfA 2025. It's a great pleasure that in my name and in the name of the Rector of the University, Professor Paulo Águas, welcome you to the University and to Faro. As you know, this is a major event, certainly for the university and I believe for African archaeology too. We have 58 sessions. Let me look at my paper here. More than 500 papers, over 550 participants, 4 keynotes, and a plenary event with 6 guests. We have student workshops, or yesterday. We have a Zania workshop, McDonald Institute workshop, ERC workshop, and we have also UNESCO event. So this is truly a great opportunity to meet you all and to work together for a better archaeology and a better African archaeology. So it's great to have you here. I'm going to pass the word to my colleagues here. Yes, and I just, again, want to say welcome and enjoy Faro, enjoy the meeting, and have a great 4, 5 days, I guess, 6 days maybe, of work here. The organization is here, Eric is here in the name of the organization, the local organization, and you sure can come to us and talk if you have any needs or thoughts or anything. Thank you again, welcome, and enjoy. Thank you.
I'm going to stand. Bom dia. Bonjour. Good morning. Guten Morgen. Everything. Ekaro. Ujambo. Well, I'm so glad to be here. Many of you don't know me. You voted for me, but you don't know me. My name is Archaeologists. I'm the president of SAfA, and it is my great honor to join my colleagues here to welcome you to the 27th Biennial meeting of the Society of Africanist Archaeologists. 54 years ago, some great men and women came together to professionalize African archaeology in North America and Europe, and they created SAfA. And here we are, 57 years later. At that time, maybe only 50 members were present when they established this organization. Today, we are more than 1,400. A majority of the members are based in Africa. Let me start by saying that my few remarks are to express gratitude. Gratitude to you all for making the time, making the efforts to be here. Gratitude to the University of Algarve for hosting us. This has been 2.5 years in the making. It's a lot of time at work. I know there are many times I call Eric, 2 a.m., he will pick up my call. 12 a.m., he will pick up my call. 6 a.m., and the reason is that usually the calls are not that exciting. It is a complaint from you, and I have to pass that on. And it's always very, very with charm, with smile, with devotion. So let us give a round of applause to them. And thanks to all the local organizing committee for making this possible. SAfA has a deep history of commitment to students. There are many students here. If you are a student, if you are students, please stand up. Let's see you. Let's see you, students. Okay. Well, you are the future. I recall that in 1998, my first SAfA, I was an advanced graduate student. I think it was in Syracuse. So we are very proud of you. You are the future of our organization. Thanks for being here. If this is your first SAfA, remain standing, the rest sit down. Your first SAfA. Wow. Let's give you another round of applause. Well, I hope you have a great time and enjoy. Have your seat. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do another game. If over the past 10 years you've been coming to SAfA, whether a student or not, please stand up. No, within the last 10 years only. The last 10 years. Okay, the last 10 years. Okay. Only in the last 10 years. Okay. Great. That means all, all of you will get up, right? If you have been coming for the last 10 years, get up. Okay. That's good. If you've been coming the last 10 to 20 years, get up. Sorry, 11 to 20 years. 11 to 20 years. In the last 21 to 30 years. Thank you. In the last 31 to 40 years. In the last 41 to 50 years. Okay. In the last 52 to 54 years. Okay. They can't stand up. Thank you. Now, I did that game so that for the students, if you want to write the oral history of SAfA conference, you know who to talk to, okay? For those of you who are netizens, we would like you to make big noise on social media. TikTok it, Facebook it, what else? What else there? Tweet it, and all those things that you do. Blue sky it. It's okay. Make SAfA conference trend on social media. Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Eric Fisher. Many of you know me at least by name only because I've been the one spamming your inboxes for the last year and some. So I've got a couple of notes of housekeeping to go through first, and I got a couple of remarks before we pass it over to our keynote speaker. First thing is that many of you have noticed that there have been some scheduling changes. We've done our level best to make this the most organized conference possible, but as you can imagine, when you bring 587 academics together, things get moved around, especially at the last minute. So there are some scheduling changes. So if you see any discrepancies between what's printed in the booklet and online, trust what's online, okay? The online is the most accurate representation of who is doing what and when and where. But if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to pull aside any of us who are wearing the blue badges. But otherwise, I hope that you are all settled in and having a very nice time. And I have some remarks here that, okay, where is it? Okay. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome each and every one of you, both in person and everyone who's joining us online here to Faro. This conference, the journey to this conference actually began 4 years ago, in 2021. And I was approached with the opportunity and immediately recognized that this was a really exciting opportunity for both my colleagues and myself, and we very eagerly and excitedly said yes. And the first thing that I want to recognize is the organizing committee. These members are Ana Gomes, Thomas Prophet, Sarah Rhodes, Celia Gonzalez, Sofia Fonseca, and my co-chair, Nuno Bichu. Each of these, all right, round of applause. They have put in a tremendous amount of work, hundreds of hours, to make this a success. And so I ask each and every one of you, as you're milling around the conference, if you see one of the blue badges, one of these individuals, to please just pull them aside and thank them for their very, very hard work. But
That's 550 people around, so maybe not everybody.
But it's been a labor of love, and we are so excited that each of you are here and everything. And early on when we were discussing how we wanted to shape this conference, and we settled on the theme of Crossroads through time, we realized then that this theme carries a layered meaning. It connects both the past, the present, and the future. And at its most immediate level, this theme refers to the Algarve itself. It's a region with a very deep history of cultural convergence. For millennia, there have been Mediterranean maritime traders coming through here. The Romans, this was kind of their playground. It's still a playground for many other people today. Come here, a lot of tourists. The North African Moors have left a very deep and profound impact. I mean, the name Algarve itself, it derives from an Arabic word, meaning the West. So there is a lot of cultural connectedness here. And so the idea of this place as a crossroads really deeply resonated with ourselves. But the theme also resonates with the challenges of the present, particularly academia today, which stands on its own crossroads. And this conference is not only a reaffirmation of our own shared values, but it reminds us of the importance of collaboration across borders, of elevating historically marginalized voices, and of approaching the study of the past, both with scientific rigor and ethical responsibility. And so I hope that we all think about this as we proceed here and we interact with our colleagues and we share all of our experiences from all around the world and all across Africa. So in this way, SAfA is both a look back, but also a step forward. And I think it's going to provide us with a chance to navigate where we are going in this rather uncertain time. And so I'm especially proud to share that this also happens to be the largest SAfA conference ever. As Nuno said, we have 587 presentations alone. That's a lot, and it is a lot. With representation from many places that have been historically underrepresented within SAfA itself, so all across Africa, but in many other places from around the world. So I want to thank each of you for the time and effort that you have taken to present here and to come here. And I hope that you all have an absolutely fantastic time. Thank you very much. Okay, and now I would like to introduce our very first keynote speaker. I'd like to introduce Krish Seetah. He is an associate professor of environmental social sciences, of oceans, of anthropology, and he's also a senior fellow at the Woods Institute of the Environment. Sorry, he's from Stanford University. I failed to mention that. By profession, he's a zooarchaeologist, and he focuses primarily on colonization and colonialism. And he's also the director of the Mauritian Archaeological and Cultural Heritage Project, which studies European imperialism and colonial activity. And today, Krish is here to give us our first keynote, and I would like for everyone to give him a round of applause. Welcome him to the stage.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is my first ever SAfA, so I should have stood up at some point early on there. I'm really just, I hope I, yes, sorry, I should have probably looked at this earlier to figure out what I have to do. Help. And to move the notes down? Oh, it's over there, is it? Yes. We'll be fine, don't worry. Thank you very much. And just to echo some of those lovely sentiments earlier, just a huge amount of gratitude and the chance to be here and speak to you. As I said to you, my first ever SAfA, so I'm either never ever going to get invited back here again, or hopefully we'll have a chance to talk again. I, again, want to echo the thoughts in terms of thanking the organizers. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic opportunity, and I think just looking around the room, it really says a lot about the place of African archaeology in the world today. Sorry, can it just move down, or leave it where it is? It's fine. I've been the director of the Mauritian Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Project since 2008. Maybe I will just very quickly do something. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we launched in 2008, and the project really is an interdisciplinary approach to archaeology. We're really with a sense of being deeply applied. I hope that we're relevant, and we seek to support local colleagues and communities as they tackle a range of contemporary challenges. And I hope that really is clear that we're trying to take archaeology and make it meaningful to communities today. And many of the problems that the colleagues in Mauritius face are actually as a result of the period of, they stem from the period of colonialism. The archaeology itself, I'm glad Eric pointed out, I was a zoo archaeologist. Actually, my background is zoo archaeology specific. I was focused on butchery analysis. And my initial thoughts about going to Mauritius was that I would study zoo arch in Mauritius. When I got out there, I realized that there was a lot more to do. And immediately it became obvious that I could take a kind of total archaeology approach. So I'll spend the first few slides on a quite general overview of the archaeology of Mauritius and the implications for community engagement specifically. So how have we come to connect with colleagues and communities out there, and how has the archaeology been important for them? I'll then walk us through 3 vignettes that sort of centralizes and emphasizes. Now, Crossroads is such a big topic. I was thinking, how can I make a connection? And yesterday, this presentation said, I'm not actually talking about the archaeology of Crossroads. I'm talking about the outcomes. I woke up this morning and thought, no, you're absolutely talking about the archaeology of Crossroads. Just reframe this. So it's been a process to sort of get my head around. But these 3 vignettes sort of focus on laboring lifeways, the outcomes of being a crossroads itself, and how archaeology can be applied. And in this case, I'm going to use the examples of marine ecology and disease modeling. I'll then sort of wrap up. The final, shall I say, short vignette is really on how we can support the process of decolonization with a very specific case study. And I hope I get this right. Is that right? Yes. So before all of that, I just want to set the stage and really try to connect to the themes not only of the conference, but where we are specifically. The Mascarenes themselves are named after Pedro Mascarenas, who first visited in April of 1512. And there's no indigenous population on the Mascarenes. And the Mascarenes include La Réunion, which is, there we go, French, then Rodrigue and Mauritius, which form part of the islands of the Republic of Mauritius. So having left Tromelin there, that's a disputed territory at the moment, but all of these islands constitute the Republic of Mauritius, and they span 5 degrees to 20 degrees south of the equator, within an exclusive economic zone of 2.3 million kilometers squared. So I hope immediately you understand why it is I want to make archaeology relevant to this region as a whole. But in particular, I've pointed out this kind of broad geographic context because we capture a range of ecological niches. And that obviously has its challenges, but that's really been critical to what the work that we've done and what we're trying to do, because ecology, and of course ecology and its implications for disease, are part of that work. So I just ask you to keep that in mind. Now, to kind of put Mauritius in the contemporary context, Mauritius has the highest population density in Africa, is the only Hindu majority nation on the continent, and despite its diminutive size, it has one of the highest relative GDPs on the continent as well. So it's one of these places that is unique, It is the place where African, Asian, European populations converge. Syncretic African belief systems, I'll just explain that in a second, actually meet Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and indeed Mauritians for a long time sort of identified with their religion as opposed to an ethnic background as such. Also things like Western germ theory meets Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese medicine, and African healing systems. Mauritius is the place of the first botanical gardens and the first meteorological society in the southern hemisphere. And when we look at labor, it's actually the site of the Great Experiment, Britain's trial to replace enslaved populations with indenture, a new form of labor. And this has been commemorated by UNESCO inscription of the Aprovasigat World Heritage Site. An indenture is a system that's adopted around the world. So in brief, Mauritius is the quintessential crossroad, both culturally, linguistically. We all speak 3 languages all the time, and you may have another depending on your ethnic background. So it's really common to sort of have this plurality in the culture, of course, geographically and temporally. And I might touch on Crossroads every now and then, but really I hope it's implicit in the work itself and in what I present to you, that Crossroads really is a theme. And I'm very glad you gave the chance to sort of help me to rethink about this. Thanks. I just wanted to explain this. This is from the site of Le Morne. This is an ancient burial, but at the top are syncretic belief systems. So they just amalgamate. There's Indian earth lamps, crosses, and sacrifices in the form of lemons and so on that are being cut to sacrifice, to sort of signify the sacrifice. So Longanis is the sort of the Indian Ocean, our region equivalent of Vudao and so on. So it is really a congregation of religious ideologies. And so this keynote actually observes the archaeology of Mauritius as a crossroads and extrapolates the outcomes of this kind of 17 years of research to sort of demonstrate what being at a crossroads means for the population historically and today. But first, I'll just really quickly go into a little bit of detail on the archaeology of the archaeology specifically. This is not a gratuitous slide. I'm not trying to be trying to encourage tourism, although you should come. This is actually one of our sites. This is the World Heritage Site of Le Morne, which commemorates resistance to slavery, marronage. And it's actually this Inselberg that is the World Heritage Site. One of our sites, Le Morne Old Cemetery, is right here. But the rest of that area is actually owned by one person. So that sort of relationship between colonialism, past and present, is right there. The first year that we went out, we weren't allowed up there. Luckily, the government provided a helicopter for us to go and do our surveys. But it really says a lot about the kind of contemporary relationships. The island was initially named, the only sort of early maps, it may have been noted on, or it has been noted on Arab maps, but it was named Ilha do Sena, which is Island of the Swan on early Portuguese maps. And Portuguese sailors apparently arrived there 1507. But it was first colonized by the Dutch, and then the French and the British. These little stars in black, here, and here, sorry, these were the sites that had been excavated before we started our work in 2012, and we've then added to that in the sites in red. And I sort of want you to note that those sites are very much associated with colonialism. So we've gone from sort of forts and colonial enclaves to the implications of colonialism on local environment and on the peoples themselves under conditions of enslavement and indenture. And this paper brings together Crumley and Matthew Davis's work on historical ecology. There's a beautiful quote from Davis's 2010 paper, basically talking about the development of later communities who, while not the first to achieve some perceived milestone, could nonetheless be confidently linked to modern-day peoples in a more direct historical manner, thus producing a long-term record of continuity and change that may have resonance in the present. And basically, we're looking at the archaeology of the vast majority of the people who actually inhabit the island today, as opposed to those forts that never really connected with the contemporary population. In addition to some really fantastic terrestrial sites, we've got over 1,300 shipwrecks. 800 of those are of historical significance. I'll talk to you about shipwrecks in a minute in one of these little vignettes. One of these shipwrecks is Le Sirius, which was involved in the 1810 Battle of Vieux-Grand-Port. I'm just going to ask you, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. Keep that date in your mind. So really, ecological impacts are a major focus of the work. 95.6% of the island's forests have gone since colonization. And through programs of coring and geophysical assessment, this is working with the colleagues from University of Reading, we seek to provide baseline evidence on ecological change over time. You can imagine the island underwent just devastating reduction in biodiversity, the most famous casualty of which is the dodo. I always get asked, do I work on the dodo? No. But also the Mauritian kestrel, the pink pigeon, endemic bats have all been brought to the brink of extinction. And in part, this is because of the introduction of these species, so these commensals. So we study the biogeography and evolution of these introduced commensals alongside the potential role within disease, both today and in the past. Molecular techniques have been a really significant aspect of our work, and I'm hoping that I'm giving you signals that we really want to integrate the scientific approaches into the historical archaeology itself. So we've looked at the diet of laboring communities through isotope analysis, alongside DNA work. Now, initially, 2011-12, when we were doing the first modern as well as ancient studies of DNA, we had no DNA analysis for the modern population at all. We were somewhat criticized because we've got rich historical archives where we already know where people are coming from the history. DNA is much more than the history of people's origins. And again, I'll come back to that point. More recently, we've got newer results coming out, not yet published, but really putting much more context to the period of enslavement and where people are coming from, which includes West Africa and parts of Asia. So we're complexifying, although these have already all been signaled to in the historical records as well. And for the archaeologists among you, alongside the ecological and molecular research, we of course work on the preservation of cultural artifacts, the analysis of these materials, provenance. I'll spend a few slides on this now. And what I'll show you here are all objects associated specifically with laboring communities. This shackle, maybe we think of it as it relates to a site of enslavement, but actually this was associated with layers with indentured laborers. And in principle, by this time, these means of control should not have been used. This coffin box is from a part of a cemetery that was ascribed for indentured laborers. So evidently, this is not the burial of a laboring person. So these artifacts are really describing more to us. And I just wonder, while you look at this is actually a ring from the site of Bois Marchand. Anybody want to shout at me and tell me what this residue is here? I will not waste any more time. You all failed. It's actually a fingerprint. And this is a phenomenal find because from the site of Bois Marchand, we have burial records. Of course, we've got the individual grave goods, as I'm showing you here, and the osteological remains themselves. But in this case, we actually have the fingerprint of the individual. So we'll be able to triangulate between these data sets. Single artifacts have proven to be incredibly important important for public engagement and valorization. These earrings, they're in fact made of gold. And these little beads, they're lead glass beads. And they've been recovered from the grave of an enslaved woman. So these are perhaps, I use the term valuable in a very careful way here, but these are some of the most valuable finds recovered from the grave of an enslaved person. And they hopefully, they start to challenge those ideas that we have about enslaved lifeways and the material culture of enslaved people. Obviously, this individual was connected in a way to artifacts that we wouldn't normally associate with enslavement. We're very fortunate, actually. These are from 2002, a site called of Albion. We were able to have these preserved. The Intercontinental Slavery Museum had asked for these to be part of their inauguration in 2023. So it was a huge honor to be able to provide artifacts for that exposition. And of course, enslavement and these objects fit very well together. And I just close this opening section. I really want to emphasize the power of archaeology, of cultural heritage, to bring knowledge, including scientific knowledge, to the public. This is an image from the other World Heritage Site that commemorates indenture, Aprovasigat. And this image is from the Interpretation Center. And the materials, the bricks and so on in the foreground, our team undertook excavations. And the idea was this was rescue excavation, and it was bricked over, and it was going to be part of the then we'd have a flat floor for the interpretation center. Luckily, the colleague we were working with, who's passed, unfortunately, Corinne Forest, she saw the value of this archaeology and said, no, we've got to keep this. So in fact, they put the concrete floor underneath and then repositioned the artifacts, and this ship was put there to sort of signify, because this was the place that indentured laborers first arrived on Mauritius and commenced this, this transition in a new form of labor. That's been absolutely critical, this interpretation center. And I don't want to take any credit, but actually I think the artifact, the objects, the archaeology itself has been really key. In 2008, when we started working in Mauritius, about 250 people were visiting this World Heritage Site. 2024, 66,600 visited. And 86% of those people were local. So it's really transforming the conception of what cultural heritage means and whose it is. And I'll just sort of pause there and hope that that's a quick summary and a snapshot of the archaeological approaches. I've actually just gone through very quickly. There's a lot more work that we're doing, but I hope that that will kind of set the stage really for looking at much more specifically how, you know, we can kind of connect to this theme of Crossroads, and ultimately then hopefully come to some conclusions about what this might mean for African archaeology more generally. And the first little vignette I want to focus on is the lifeways of laboring people, as I mentioned to you, picking up this theme of this narrative of Crossroads, but from quite a unique perspective. This is, I've deliberately not labeled these bones, these elements, because here I want to emphasize that this is not normal bone. We don't need to be osteologists to know this. This is not normal bone. And really the question here is, how do you deal with the pain of working on a sugar plantation for decades? What are the impacts on your body? This individual was about 60 years old, analyzed by a colleague of mine from the University of La Laguna, Jonathan Santana, and recovered from the Lemourne Old Cemetery that I mentioned to you earlier, which is associated with enslavement and emancipation. And there's many, many indications, not just on this individual, but others, of osteomyelitis. So this is bone inflammation. All of this is additional bone growth, and there was a lot of indications of dental disease as well. And this individual was one of three who were recovered, three individuals who actually had pipes with them. So we decided to do some analysis on the residues of the pipes themselves. And we worked with the University of Kafoski, long-standing relationship with them. And really flight by time analysis and so on, gas chromatography, expecting, because European clay pipes are associated with tobacco smoking. So we expected to find tobacco, and we did. Given the region, we might also have expected to find cannabis. Even if in the historical records, cannabis is apparently a drug that then arrives with indentured laborers, so after 1836, 38. But we found cannabis as well. These results were just staggering, though, because what we would never have anticipated would have been Salverin divinorum. And it's actually a plant, a drug cultivated by the Mazteca people in Oaxaca in Mexico, 17,000 kilometers in a straight line from Mauritius. And it was only known to Western science in 1938. Locally in Mexico, it's used for divination, spiritual context, very little indications of palliative uses. And it's only propagated as a cultivar since 1960. So how this plant ends up in the grave of an enslaved man in Mauritius 150 years before it's known to Western science remains a conundrum to us. In addition to tobacco and cannabis, we also found opium, cannabis, flavored tobacco in the hookahs of indentured laborers. So of course, these are being used as a mechanism for, shall we say, sedation. This paper is actually looking at how this period when we're using drugs to deal with the stresses of life, stresses of work, then sort of reflect on how we use these products today. And really, this is scientific analysis for the first time, I believe, for this region anyway, connecting laboring communities into these cryptic networks of exchange. And we're still really astounded to try to figure out how Salvia ended up there. So this example really illustrates the power of archaeology to provide a much more holistic narrative of laboring peoples. And it takes us out of that context of saying, you know, everything is done to them, to these people. There is an agency there, and particularly within the context of disease, health, medicine, medical provision, is a really important way for us to think about how we study these communities. Again, a little pause before I move on. That's all the pause you're going to get. And I'm moving on from the value of cultural heritage for education, for engagement, understanding community life ways. Now just to go in a completely different direction, and the potential archaeological artifacts in a very broad sense has to support research on ocean ecosystems. And this is a really exciting project for me, partly because I love to dive. Now around the world, historical but also obviously modern wrecks are tangible examples of connectivity and human mobility. I mean, what else could be, that's the quintessential artifact of Crossroads, isn't it? But shipwrecks have been romanticized. If there's any maritime archaeologists in the room, I apologize. I don't mean to say that you don't study these things, but there has been a somewhat, I forget the paper, I couldn't find it this morning, but there is a quote that says, shipwrecks are a microcosm of society. Shipwrecks don't include many women. If it's an enslaved or indentured shipwreck, that doesn't represent a microcosm of society. So there is this romanticism about what the shipwreck represents. And I think we've paid obviously very good attention to the heritage value, but much less potential to the ecological implications and impacts, both positive and negative, of shipwrecks. If you're an island that is 1,840 kilometers squared and you've got 1,300 shipwrecks, this could be a significant gap in knowledge. But how significant could that be? In other words, what might the ecological impacts be as a consequence of you being a crossroads in the historical past? And I'll use this analogy. Sorry, I'll just take a little drink first. I'll use this analogy. If we had aeroplanes crashed and scattered all around the planet, we would know about their ecological impact. We've got Cessnas, we've got jumbo jets, we'd know about their ecological impact. We actually know very little because these vessels are in the sea. On the positive side, shipwrecks, both modern and ancient, serve as fish aggregating devices, FADs. So they could be important for small-scale fishers. They serve as artificial reefs. They bring positive benefits in ecological context. On the negative side, UNESCO estimates 3 million shipwrecks, and about one large vessel every 2 weeks is lost at sea. And in some cases, at least once a year, we have no idea where that vessel goes down. So this is a growing problem. Recent wrecks, including World War II, which are going to come under UNESCO mandates relatively soon, they're the largest source of oil pollution. So shipwrecks represent, the historical ones as well, quite a negligent attitude to ocean stewardship specifically. And there may be a quite significant polluting context. If we're looking at oil, that seems relatively straightforward to understand, but it may be more complicated than that. So what we're doing is using Mauritius as a case study for a global phenomenon, shall we say, where wrecks serve as a proxy for all anthropogenic structures in the sea. Cables, rigs, et cetera, and the value of the shipwreck is that it gives us this context over time. How are these things changing? What are the future predictive capacities to understand what we're doing when we are adding things into the environment, and including things like noise pollution and so on that these generate? They change the soundscape of the water. And I know it might seem like this is a problem of the modern wrecks. I've used a picture of a small-scale fisher here. Small-scale fishers, not only in Mauritius, but in other parts of the world, really depend. In fact, small-scale fishing is the vast majority of fishing in the world, actually. It's a huge sub-industry, shall we say. We carried out some analysis on Le Victoire, which is a shipwreck that had glass, British glass. These glass objects were probably used in the exchange of enslaved people. When we analyzed the glass, lead glass, so very high levels of glass, because this glass was very fragile and had been reused many times, there was a lot of arsenic added, up to 3,000 parts per million. So we're basically concentrating heavy metals and polluting artifacts in an area where fishermen then go and fish. So are we creating a problem for ourselves in the future? Are we actually sort of exposing groups of people that are highly marginalized in the context of the fishing industry to these pollutants? And in fact, there's a project in Madagascar which is actually trying to use artificial wrecks to support livelihoods of small-scale fishers by providing food security. So there's a circularity here. We just don't know what the impact of these vessels are. We just very quickly show you this. It's a project, we recently had a discovery grant. We've had Nat Geo funding for this. And the Stanford Robotics Center have picked up this project as their flagship Oceans project. And basically, if you're diving, you're sort of restricted to about 25 meters of effective work. What this robot will allow us to do is go down much deeper than that. And these autonomous humanoid robots really allow us to go into the deep waters of the continental shelf, again, coming back to the size of that EEZ. And we're supporting them. This is Oceans 1K. It can go down to 1 kilometer. We're supporting them to develop how this new generation of robot can actually go down to 5 kilometers, taking things like, to capture eDNA, to deploy soundscaping equipment, et cetera, and also recover artifacts from these deeper wrecks to understand both their cultural heritage value, but also their ecology. We're taking this aspect of it, and we're knitting that with, we're in the process of seeking funding for this. We work with the Department of the Continental Shelf and Maritime Exploration Zone, very long-winded, that easier to say, sits right under the Prime Minister's office in Mauritius. Of course, we're helping with there's a process of capacity exchange, but we're very fortunate to be working with this group in helping them to develop what is already underway, an ocean observation platform. And we're hopefully, what our attempt is to take what we're doing on the cultural heritage side, and so we bridge the social and natural sciences, because overwhelmingly oceanography has focused on science. So we want to be able to think about ocean uses, marine environments and so on, marine resources, but also help with survey and physical oceanography as well. And just so I don't end on a negative note, I don't know how to, can you just hit play on that? It should have started already. On the first survey that we actually started of this project, I worked with two marine ecologists who were out with us, and I found them filming this fish constantly. They were really fascinated by it. This is probably new to science. It's around one of the wrecks. There's a specific niche that's been created around this wreck, and it seems as if this particular species of pipefish, which we've not recorded around the waters of Mauritius since at all, may be associated specifically. So there is some, it's not all bad news. And that's, can I go to the next slide, please? It's just replaying the video. Okay, I've got it. And the last one of these short little vignettes before I move on to the kind of final case study. Focus on disease. Archaeology has identified 4 disease transitions. The first one is when we come down from the trees and we become bipedal and we expose ourselves to sylvatic diseases. The 4th disease transition is the one that we're in now, hyper-hygienic environments and the types of disease that we're exposed to. Archaeology has tended to focus on the 2nd disease transition, the transition from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to agriculture, where we use carbohydrates more, we become more settled, we process foods in a specific way. So 10 to 12,000 years ago, that's the disease transition that archaeologists, we in this room, think is critical. We've done virtually nothing on the 3rd disease transition, the one that happens during colonialism. Not nothing, that's not right. We've done relatively little. And that's a massive gap, because the largest population movement prior to the modern period, when we know the relationships between mobility and disease, happens during the period of colonialism. And to my knowledge, we haven't really focused the genetics of this period of mobility and movement. One of the largest exchanges of pathogens as well, well noted in history. Again, apart from work that we've done in one study in Mexico, we really haven't looked at the pathogens from scientific genetic genomic techniques to understand how these diseases are moving about at this period. We've sort of assumed, we've accepted Crosby and then Jared Diamond's narrative that pathogens wiped out indigenous populations because they had no immunity. Neither pathogens nor immunity can be seen from archaeological records. That's something that we see from genetics. And so we're accepting a narrative that has to be questioned. And this is the site of Bois Marchand. If you want a reason why we should question that, this is the site of Bois Marchand. The ring was from there. This was the largest cemetery in the southern hemisphere when it was inscribed in 1868, following an epidemic in 1867 where 10% of the population were wiped out by malaria. And that was one of many cyclical epidemics. And it may be a gap in historical archives, but we have no indications of malaria during the French period, and then it becomes epidemic during the British period. What happened? What took place? We have waves of cholera, yellow fever, plague, and also smallpox. In addition to cemetery sites, we're also very fortunate This is the Flat Island, one of the best preserved quarantine stations in this part of the Indian Ocean. We're working with Archaeologists. In fact, there's a team out there now. There was a cyclone, so they got stuck for a little bit, actually. They're coming back. They're all right, don't worry. Working with Archaeologists now for serial nomination of this site because it fits in with that context of indenture and the roots and so on. So now I hope I will come back and justify why I spent 10 slides describing all of these little sub-projects, because we're bringing all of those, that summary of techniques really shows us we're leveraging those wide data sets, including climate proxy evidence from coral. And coral's fantastic. We actually just got our permits last month, so yes, we'll be able to come and we'll be doing some coral coring. We've identified the corals themselves, these large Porites corals that capture fantastic evidence on climate, sea surface temperature, which is a good proxy for air temperature, which I'm sure you all know the relevance between vector-borne diseases and temperature itself. But they also capture signatures of agriculture. So we can start to relate these topics that really it's quite difficult to do. We've got wonderful historical records of temperature. These are plantations. The colonial elite were very good at keeping records of temperature and other meteorological climatic conditions. And these are actual records from the Bois Marchand Cemetery itself back to 1868. And these are all accurate to the sub-monthly scale. So they're fantastic. We can actually start to relate transmission, well, mortality with land use changes over time. It's a really key thing. It's very, very difficult to do even today, and it hasn't yet been done, actually. We use some really nice AI tools looking through these burial archives. If you went to hospital during this period, you were more likely to die than if you stayed at home. And this reveals a really intriguing sort of relationship between society, social context, and biological context. Social context, these are mainly indentured laborers. You're being paid a wage, but if you take a day off, you get doctor days pay. So you won't go to hospital for love nor money. When you are really sick, and maybe you've had multiple bouts of malaria, you're probably under conditions of malnutrition, you decide to go to hospital at the last moment. You are rehydrated and you're given food. The malaria, this is where the biology comes in, the malaria parasite flares and you die. So it really brings together the social and biological aspects. And intriguingly, exactly the same principle was seen during COVID. People who are at the margins of society only go to hospital when they're really depleted at the last stages. Really fascinating way to connect. The population genomics as well, again, we're not just using history here, we're using, as I mentioned to you earlier, population genetics, really to understand those relationships and sort of look at that in a more complex way, where populations are coming from and their potential responses. Egg casings are a way for us to find the DNA of the vector itself, whether it's a malaria, in this case malaria would be a mosquito parasite, but very interesting, and just quite recently we've actually recovered the pathogen DNA of malaria falciparum, malaria, and smallpox. So this is the first time, I believe, maybe in the world, for this period that we've recovered these diseases. And I'll just show you that very quickly. This is a slide from a colleague of mine, Martin Sikora, at the Globe Institute in Copenhagen. And of course, it's a genetics, so it can never be simple. I tried to make it. So this basically where populations are mapping, and we've got South Asian, European, African, and Malagasy and admixed populations there. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Mauritius actually, did I mention that to you? Mauritius actually maps. You might look at me and say, well, you're probably mostly from India, or you might look at somebody who's of African descent, you say, well, you map like you're from Africa. Actually, Mauritius population looks like it's from the Caribbean, understandably, because we are a mixture. And so this admixed population is in the middle. I'll just add to that, these individuals also had had malaria, and these individuals had smallpox. And you can see there, we've got a context of syndemics, which is where multiple diseases, multiple infections impact at the same time. It's very common in nature. We saw it, we see if you've got HIV, for example, you're more prone to negative impacts of COVID and more prone to actually capturing the disease. But it's very hard to see that. In fact, there's a paper from 2010, historical paper that says we have no syndemics in the past. Well, actually, thankfully, we do have. And what's intriguing is that at least one individual God love them. It seems terrible to have had the most virulent form of malaria and smallpox at the same time. That must have been a really difficult moment. So we're going from the pathogen to look at the conditions around specific epidemics. I won't go into detail on this, but basically it's bringing together the environmental and the social, so we understand what some of that context is, not just revealing the pathogen, but actually what's the more holistic ecological aspect as well. How can we bring a range of biocultural resources, really effectively align them? And this, of course, really important for contemporary disease modeling. And it gives archaeologists a chance to sort of talk to modern disease ecologists and clinicians as well. And this paper sort of tries to do that, brings together some of those past and present, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned, particularly around social norms, around moments of disease. And here's a moment where it's probably useful to identify some of these gaps again. This paper is fantastic. It sort of starts off, it is a critique of the Eurocentrism in genetic research. Basically, it says we identify a relatively small number of labs that set the agenda for DNA research, and Africa tends to be left out. A much more really interesting paper is one on microbiome. There is very specific implications for your microbiome, where we know it's affected by diet and so on, but also if you move the infant child around, we take them away from their society, you have a big impact on their ability to develop a healthy microbiome. Microbiome affects how you process food and how you develop energy. It's affected by infectious disease, whether you're an adult or a child. So we're effectively doing during the period of colonialism, it might not be that much about the pathogen as much as what we do to the immunity and creating fragility in these populations, both indigenous, but also these laboring communities. So this is an opportunity really to challenge that sort of biological determinism that Crosby's work and so on has identified. And the last little moment, I'm hopefully okay on time, is really a tragic way to end, actually, and I'm sorry about that. I did ask you to remember 1810. 1810 in August, the Battle of Vieux-Grand-Port, it's actually a naval victory that the French win over the British. And it's commemorated on the Arc de Triomphe, one of the most significant for the French. 3 months later, the British land 10,000 troops on the then Ile-de-France, Mauritius. The French say, we capitulate, and Britain takes over sovereignty. 1814, the Treaty of Paris, Britain hands back La Réunion, Île Bourbon at that time, but they retain Mauritius, and Mauritius includes the territory of Chagos at that time. In 1968, when Mauritius seeks independence from Britain, the then Prime Minister of Britain basically says, we are going to hang on to, we only give you independence if we can keep Diego Garcia. And Diego Garcia is kept to give the US a naval base, a joint UK-US naval base, and the Chagosian community are forcibly removed under absolutely appalling conditions. Within 3 weeks of that decision in 1968, the UN basically says, you've done something illegal and you need to rectify this. And Britain basically don't do anything. In 2010, Britain instituted the world's largest no-take marine protected area. So this entire zone here is a no-take marine protected area, which means you can't fish at all. Should you repatriate a community, they can't actually fish those waters. However, Diego Garcia is kept out of that. So military personnel can fish these waters, and they do. The Chagosian community basically left a set of atolls that were beautiful, but relatively low-key at that time. And in effect, they've been fighting for 50 years to go back to this world's largest no-take marine protected area, as well as an island that has one of the largest UK-US naval bases in the Indian Ocean. In 2000, the English High Court actually ruled that the way the Chagosians were moved was illegal. The UK government still hadn't been willing to do anything. 2019, UN General Assembly voted that the UK's occupation of Chagos was illegal. And the International Court of Justice, this is the important one, ruled the occupation illegal as well. Now, the ICJ ruling is actually based on the Chagosian right to self-determination, a people's right to self-determination. And that suddenly becomes really significant. I'm just going to skip through the rest of that and just say this is a meeting in February 2024. a really significant moment. It looked like there was a great progress between the governments of Mauritius and the UK, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that. There's a lot of geopolitics behind it, but maybe time is not going to allow me to do that now. And in the middle here is our Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Anu Jagnat, the UN Ambassador Kunjal, who was the UN Ambassador to Mauritius. This is actually Matthew Gould, the CEO of the Zoological Society of London. And this is where this thing becomes complicated. Zoological Society of London, after many years, said, actually, we think Mauritius is right here. This area should be under that control. And that was a stimulus for the government to sort of say, okay, maybe we can work together. And this is Philippe Sands, who is the lawyer who's been working with Mauritius for about 10 years. And the most significant figure there is Olivier Banco, who's the community leader for the Chagossians in Mauritius specifically. And it was in 2020, Philippe Sands actually sent me an email and said, this aspect, this right to self-determination actually depends on culture. And so suddenly, archaeology, cultural resources, cultural dimensions, in a very, very broad way, became massively significant to this whole process of decolonization. And it was at this meeting I was asked to be the cultural working group lead for this process in helping, basically as a group of us, to integrate Chagossian cultural resources, very broadly defined, into the new Marine Protected Area dossier to overturn this no-take Marine Protected Area that had been established before, and that dossier is to go before the UN. And in this new process, we should integrate repatriation specifically. And that will mean looking at the islands where the communities had lived before, the conditions of those living situations before, etc. Of course, nothing is ever simple with politics. October 2003, everything looked like it was moving forward 2004, everything looked like it was moving very, very well. Early in November of the same year, the government in the US changed, and the president of the US didn't like the deal and paused it. Then the government in Mauritius changed, and he didn't like the deal either and paused it. C'est la vie. So it was a really strange moment because all of a sudden, what looked like a 50-year struggle reaching a conclusion, governments were ready to go, just halted. And something is missing there. Excuse me, I'm just going to do that first. It looked like everything had come into the right order around March of this year, and then actually the UN, an ad hoc committee were, including Bina da Costa, who's the chair for the working group of people of African descent, basically said, this new deal I hate calling it deal, but this new document doesn't take the Chagossian rights into consideration. And specifically what Britain had done was remove the word sovereign from the new negotiations. So the sovereignty exchange wasn't actually going to be a sovereignty exchange. Mauritius government would still need to go back to Britain for everything it wanted to do in Chagos, scientific work, et cetera, and of course repatriation. So, of course, we're back to the drawing board, and this has been just an awful moment for the Chagossian community. But they are extremely resilient. And I'll just go back one slide. We've had our first cultural working group meeting. Olivier Banco, the dean of our school, actually opened the meeting. It was really brilliant for him to be there. Olivier was speaking from the perspective. He actually launched his book there. It was a really key moment, and we had an uncommon dialogue, a closed session where we had a representative from the US Navy who works at former Navy captain who is part of the university, just really giving perspectives and finding a way through this process. Ultimately, the idea here, there are differences between Mauritians and Chagossians, but we also share links. And all of this work that I've tried to show you over this presentation has really been to set the stage for what we'd like to do, hopefully in support of and in service to the Chagossian community, helping to develop knowledge from the existing settlements, because resettlement will need to probably take place. It's only going to be taking place on 2 of these islands, but also understanding where Mauritius we had sugar plantations, coconut was the plantations on Chagos. We really do have to make these connections both tangible and intangible. And there is an idea really to sort of think about inscription of this site as well, not only because of its cultural heritage context, but also because of its really significant geopolitical one as well. And as I wrap this up, I hope I'm okay for time. What I'm showing you here This project, along with a number of others, we've just been funded by the Institute for Advancing Just Societies to start working with the Chagosian community using digital humanities, neuroaesthetic tools, for example. So the Cultural Working Group has been one of the impetus for that. But all of these projects are now part of an initiative at Stanford to institutionalize a center on culture and sustainability specifically, because we have a huge opportunity to really respond to sustainability and climate change in very specific ways. The work that I've shown you on disease itself, there's really this idea to sort of expand that. We're working with colleagues in Kenya and Madagascar already, in conversation with colleagues in Madagascar, but we want to make this much broader within Pan-Africa as well. This is just an approach. It's something that can be taken elsewhere. We've got good historical archives in other parts of Africa, and we've got this fantastic archaeology too. And really, as I end this keynote, and as others have made the case before me, many others, I'm sure, have really spoken about, I hope you agree with me, there's an appeal here to make more effort to study the islands of Africa. These are some of the least studied islands. And Peter Mitchell has kind of made that case over and over again. And particularly because island communities are at greatest risk. I just mentioned AIMS, so SIDS. Africa is part of the AIMS SIDS, which is a completely disparate. It's African, Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, and South China Sea islands. All the others are quite contiguous. African islands get lumped with other things. So there is this kind of political context as well in terms of shaping more cohesion between these island communities themselves. And also what I've tried to bring some attention to facets of Eurocentrism. Whose archaeology is this for? How do we connect to these communities? Where do these techniques get deployed? This hasn't been this is not connecting Eurocentrism to work on disease, and the use of scientific techniques is not, it's just simply to spotlight a blind spot, and one that we can easily, and we are already addressing. However, the point remains, we probably know more about the genetics of diseases from the Vikings than we do for the whole of the period of colonialism and diseases that have really reshaped the world as we see it today, not just through epidemics. But maybe a couple of final points. Chagos is a very important geopolitical context, but what's happening in other parts of Africa, when you look at the situation in Burkina Faso, for example, or when you look at academia, I gave a talk at the IMC International Maritime Conservation Conference, and WIOMSA, I'm speaking next month, where we're really talking about decolonizing ocean science. Whether we like it or not, I think decolonization will become an increasingly important geopolitical topic. I work in global health, and it's really a mandate there in ocean science and so on, really to start thinking about these topics much more effectively. And archaeology has an absolutely essential and fundamental role to play in this process of decolonization. And maybe some of that has to start within the subject itself. But certainly once done, we have an opportunity both to situate that period, to situate the historical context, the archaeological, the people themselves, and help us move beyond that. The extent to which we'd like to do that is, of course, down to us. But I hope maybe that could be a theme for a future SAfA. Thank you very much. Sorry, partners. I hope that was okay for time.
Yeah, we have like 5 minutes for questions, if anyone.
Thank you. That was absolutely incredible. A lot of work. Just wanted to get a sense, you work so much with communities that you're both a part of, but also more broadly across these oceans. How do they perceive of archaeology and its role in this process? We're academics here sitting wowed by the work that you're doing, but what is the community perspective on archaeology as a science, as an exercise, as a community of practice?
Yeah, excellent. I actually, I'll answer it in a couple of ways. This morning, I was told that basically that example, the slide that I showed you from Athorasagat when we had 66,000 people, somebody suggested to me that, no, not somebody, my wife, who's much more logical than I, basically said to me, why don't you mention that this is reshaping the way people think about themselves? And I thought, well, how dare I say something like that? And I think that's actually true. We always identified, you are a Hindu, not an Indian. You are Catholic, Christian, you're not an African. People of European descent, French, could say they were French, but otherwise we were sort of using religion. And I think in Greece, increasingly, at least in Mauritius, people have started to use cultural heritage in a much more effective way to, I think there is an understanding of a shared heritage. There was a long period where, and I'll just slip into another vignette. I remember once we were excavating and somebody behind us who was part of the Apurvasi Gat team basically said, oh, they're not just digging in the dirt. This is actually a scientific process. And I'm not trying to ridicule her at all. What she was saying was something that if you work in the dirt, that can't possibly be scientific. We were the descendants of enslaved and indentured people. You are not meant to touch soil. You've moved beyond that. And I think now we have started to change that because of cultural heritage. I'm not saying that because of our work at all. I don't want to give you that impression, but certainly because of cultural heritage. And in fact, I see the way the people who are still involved in the sugarcane industry, who still cut cane, are infinitely valorized in a way that I haven't seen since, I've never seen in my life. In the last 5 years, we work on one of the first sugar estates where indentured laborers actually arrived, and the people who cut cane now are just given so much worth and so much value. I think there really has been a shift in an understanding that the history is shared and working in the soil isn't anything to be ashamed of. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for a very stimulating presentation. I was wondering, any research on Rodrigue? Did you ever been, or and what are the relationship between Mauritius and Rodrigue? Is it a bit of a colonialism?
Yeah.
But in any case, have you done any research, and what are the parallels between the two eventually?
Yeah. So I absolutely love Rodrigue, and I'd like to go and live there. Mauritius is a very plural society. Rodrigue is predominantly people of African descent. And some of the research that we've done there, in fact, I could just, if I figured out how to use this machine, I'll just give a little nod to somebody who's brilliant, actually. This is a former PhD student who's now a postdoc, and she's fantastic. Her name is Joshina Nagia. Worked on Rodrigue specifically looking at the fishing communities and things like plastic. We were never able to have a plastic ban in Mauritius. It just went out the window. On Rodrigue, immediately implemented and maintained. Because there's a much more homogeneous society, predominantly of the Catholic faith, and relationships with the church and speaking. So I've given presentations to the Council of Religions, for example. It's a very good way to bring your work to the community because people still attend churches and so on. So they've been very effective at ecological preservation and management in a way that we just haven't been able to achieve in Mauritius, much more individualistic in Mauritius in that way. So that's we continue to work in that way. We've also had really good, she's also worked on sort of closed seasons for octopus fishing, small-scale fishers and so on. But the archaeology is something that we hope to develop in the future. We have been out, mainly it's intriguing from, the initial work was actually about wrecks around those islands too. Terrestrially, we haven't developed any archaeology out there yet. But we do want to, because I love it. It's just brilliant in Rodrigue, actually. Thank you.
I guess we have time for one or two final questions before a coffee break.
Just a comment. I just wanted to say I think it's really interesting how you brought together the interdisciplinary approach, which is really the future, I think, of archaeology. And as a bioarchaeologist, I really liked how you spoke to the artifacts, speaking to resilience and culture. And I think with slavery and that kind of history, it actually gives community hope and shows cultural resilience through very difficult times. So thanks.
Thank you. May I just, if I could very quickly respond to that. When the president was talking earlier, it really, and you had our colleagues who are just joining the field and just joining the conference, I wanted to explain, it slipped my mind. If I'd gone and worked in Mauritius and there had been a very organized plan of work, I'd be studying forts now. And actually, I studied Roman and medieval archaeology. So the work on Mauritius, there was a lot of conflict as to why I was doing that, and my mentors were telling me, you're a spanner, why are you doing that? And if I had gone into a place where it was well organized, I think the fact that there wasn't a lot of work done already, and it wasn't work that kind of connected to me at all, I wouldn't have gone in the direction. So I hope it stimulates all of you to sort of think Africa is the place that you can do really exciting research. I also absolutely agree, and I didn't want to make the point, but I think interdisciplinarity, archaeology is a toolkit. Again, I didn't make this point, but the move from anthropology to the new school of sustainability has just been so liberating. And I don't mean anything negative to those of you who are in anthropology or archaeology departments, but in the US, there is somewhat more constrained mindset to the kind of work that you can do, whereas in a school of sustainability, you can translate that. And it makes sense, of course, these disciplines are quite different, so it's not a critique of anyone. It's just the opportunity. I think absolutely agree with you. In fact, I couldn't agree with you more. Archaeology is the perfect quintessential interdisciplinary discipline, and why is it not more effectively used at the table for these high-level discussions? Thank you.
I got just one final question, and we... No, okay.
Thanks very much. Krish, fantastic presentation. Really nice to see all of this work coming together. One thing I didn't get, but maybe I missed it, was any sort of discussion about the intersection of these issues about cultural rights and cultural resilience with also the pressures of climate change that small island states in particular are facing. Thank you.
And sorry, I meant to give because the first few things on this is the first part of this title was Applied Archaeology. It's because of something that Paul wrote a very long time ago that really stuck in my mind, that the archaeology of Africa, governments of Africa don't allow you to just work for yourself. You've got to do something relevant and meaningful. And that has really been, so thank you. That gives me a chance to say that to you, and I should have said that at the beginning, forgive me. Actually, I didn't quite connect it. I took out a slide because I thought I had too many. I'm sure I went over anyway, but we're working with Rob Dunbar and other colleagues on the climate side. We've been jointly funded by the Big Ideas for Oceans grant, which basically we're looking at settlements, but we want to make sure with predictive models for climate change whether those are actually going to be sites underwater. For Chagos, for example. In Mauritius specifically, we're actually, as part of that kind of broader ocean observatory platform that the island's developing, is really to start thinking about sea level rise change and using monitoring on the main island as well for looking at how the implications are going to affect, because we depend still on sun and sea tourism. So I really had a sense, maybe back to your point as well, as soon as I started working with the government, I couldn't work for the sake of myself. It really had to be something applicable, which was, was absolutely perfect for me. So we are trying very much to do that. The work that we're looking at from the biocultural heritage and the microbiome work from the archaeological context is actually connecting with a colleague who works on microbiome in the modern day as well. So there is an attempt really to bring these perspectives back and forth, particularly around disease. And I think I'm very excited about the disease and the Ecology of Rex project, because these can immediately scale out from Mauritius to be relevant for other islands. We're developing a couple of projects in Kenya and Madagascar as well. And I think particularly Madagascar, that's a place where this type of approach for diseases that are still endemic. Mauritius is one of 2 places in Africa that has actually eliminated malaria. Malaria is still endemic in Madagascar, and so it's useful to do build those bridges as well. Thanks, Paul.
Well, thank you very much for your very interesting talk. Well, just let me remind you that if you are interested in hearing very interesting talks about Pleistocene archaeology, please come back to this room in 20 minutes. Until then, please enjoy a coffee break, take a coffee, and see you later.